thank you again, Nick. Can everyone hear me? Could someone just give me a quick coverage? Okay, thank you. Just like to make sure. Yeah, welcome back to the afternoon session. Thanks for coming back to hang out with me for a little bit longer here. One thing I will say, I do see, hopefully we have some more people come on in, but it looks like we have a smaller group. So I do want to encourage us to definitely be, interactive. If you would like to, please, again, we have fewer people, so feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat, perhaps, if you want to speak up. And Nick other Nick, I don't know if that's confusing. We're both named Nick, but not me. He can unmute you and let you talk. We could even maybe let you share your screens or something like that if you want. So yeah, let's just keep that in mind and try to be an open group here if you want. Let me start sharing my screen. And then pop this back open so I can see everything that you guys are doing. Oh, wait, okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to get everything back to where I can see what you guys are doing. All right, and right off the bat, I see Caitlin's got a question. Looks like she was messing around with playing with publishing some of this stuff, and when she published it, she did not get a web map created. Like I'm showing here, you can see my screen, hopefully. One thing that I neglected to mention is it's actually kind of nice when you upload your Survey123, you see in my content here, it created a whole new folder. And I neglected to type a good name this morning. You should give your surveys good names. I forgot to do that, so mine's just called Form 2. It creates a new folder called Survey dash, whatever the name you gave it is, and it sticks everything in there. So it creates a feature layer, the form, that's the actual survey, and a web map. And this Word document is something I was playing around with during the break. We can talk about in a minute. But Caitlin said she didn't get a web map, which that is interesting to me. The only thing I can think, Caitlin, is do you maybe have an older version of Survey123 Connect? Because I don't think it used to do that, and it started at some point with one of the releases. So that's my only off-the-cuff thought about why it's not doing that, is maybe you just have a slightly older version of Survey123 Connect. And that's a good reminder if you guys are using this. I know you guys know, like AGOL, Esri's dumping a lot of money and effort into development on that right now, and it's changing really fast. Everything and anything that's a part of the AGOL environment is changing real fast, and that includes Survey123. And this is a unique scenario where you actually have an ArcGIS Online program that you download to your desktop. Most ArcGIS Online stuff is obviously accessed online, and when they update it, you just get it when you go to AGOL. But the Survey123 Connect, obviously, so it's a desktop program. So I would encourage you to, update that every once in a while. If you go to create some new surveys and it's been a little while, check to see if there's a new version, because they may have added some neat stuff. They're adding like a lot of functionality too. It's not little minor bug fixes and tiny stuff that you don't care about too much. They really are adding a lot of extra functionality, different types of questions, even that list of the types of questions you can have. I mean, even as much as like a year or two ago, it was less than half of what it is now. So I would encourage you to do that. Make sure you keep your desktop program updated. Caitlin said, though, that she did update her Survey123 Connect, and she published it, and there's no web map. Well, Caitlin, you know that you are very good at coming up with questions that are complex in nature and stump me, and you've done it again. My only thought here is maybe, yeah, there's not even really settings that you can do. And Caitlin says, yeah, perhaps you have to create the survey in the latest version. I assume you had an older survey that you had created and you loaded that in the new one. Maybe. That's a good question. That's a real good question. I'm not sure off the top of my head. Is there a... Oh, and there are options here. I skipped over this because I don't use Portal that much. If any of you are using Portal, obviously Survey123 works with Portal. You can set your portals here and upload to your portal as opposed to ArcGIS Online. Oh, yeah, I am not sure, Caitlin. That really, you can go into the settings here and it'll ask you if you want to create the standard web map or the one using that new beta map viewer that just recently came out. So that's a good question. I don't know why it's not giving you a web map, but honestly, it doesn't really matter. If you look at this web map, if you look at what's in it, it's pretty much nothing. It's just a standard web map with nothing changed in it, and it throws the layer in there for you. So you could do the same exact thing, I mean, by just having a blank web map and just go add and grab that feature layer out of your contents. So it's not really a huge deal if it didn't create the web map. I'm still curious as to why it's not doing that, but not a big deal because you can recreate that in all of 10 seconds there. So yeah, actually that kind of gets to where I wanted to start, just show you a little bit. I'm assuming you all have some reasonable experience and comfortability working with AGOL. But just to show you, like I said, when you create the new survey, it puts everything in this folder for the form. Yeah, Karen, you don't have a Microsoft Word document. That's okay, you shouldn't. That has to do with the new reporting feature I was playing around with. And I'll kind of show you, we can play around with that a little later here in just a few minutes. I'll show you kind of what I did to get this Word template in there. Because that's a new neat feature they have. They know people want to be able to create like feature reports. So first off, you can see it goes into my map, and here's this this hosted feature layer. And I went ahead during the break and I took a few minutes just to throw down some points around my house, just as an example. So I'm going to go ahead and add this data layer to a new map. And I don't care about the old map. And there we are. You can see it throws my points on the map. And I put a bunch of points around my house where I live in Gypsum. And you can see they show up on the map. And if I click on one of them, here's my house. And my pop-up looks a little weird. We'll go through this later. I have some field names that are really long here. So it's pushing my pop-up out to the right, which doesn't look great. You can see, the feature name. It's another point. It's a private ownership. And then I also took a picture, and you can see that shows up here. I just took a picture out my office window real quick, but you can see you can open up the attachment, the picture. And, oh, how did I just, okay, that's better. And you can see who did it. You can see it was edited by my username, Nick_Allpoints, about an hour ago. If you look at some of these other ones, I create a more advanced form here, and we'll work through some of the more advanced form stuff. But here's the post office. I marked it as being a government building, and it's federal, and I marked it as being a post office. I'll show you how I did some of this. If we go back to our content, again, you can see it was just a standard hosted feature layer. I can, for instance, go up here and export it out to a shapefile or a GDB and then download that locally for use on my desktop for whatever you want to use. You can bring it into your standard, desktop GIS. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that most of you are pretty comfortable with working in AGOL, and I'm not going to go into tons of detail about this because I'm just guessing that you all are comfortable with moving layers around and mapping and kind of some of the basic stuff of what you do with data on AGOL once it's up there. So you can see it. This is just regular AGOL data, nothing weird about it, nothing special. If I go up and I launch my Survey123, again, it opens up a new tab and takes you to kind of this Survey123 special space in AGOL. And you can see right here my form 2 that we've been working with. And you can see it has 7 records. And right here, it gives you a quick overview. There's 7 total records in here. I'm the only one that has submitted any surveys, so only one person. My first submission and my last submission are both today. And you can see a little graph. There's a high spike. Looks like this is probably California time, right? Yeah, between 10 and noon, which would have been, I think this is probably Pacific time. You can see that in that hour there, I logged 6 and then 1 more. So you can kind of see, when they're being submitted to. Make sure your field crews aren't sitting at the bar at 6 o'clock in the evening and submitting these surveys, right? You can make sure that they're actually doing them in the middle of the day when you expect them to be submitting surveys. If we go over to the data tab, it opens up our map and we can see some of the points. And again, it kind of opens up our table down here too. And if I click on one of the points, it kind of opens up a pop-up that shows all the information associated with this. And it should be loading these maps. I'm not sure why it's not loading these maps. This is something I'm going to show you in a minute, how we can add kind of multiple geometries. And for some reason, it's just not wanting to load these, but you should be seeing maps where there's multiple geometries here. There's this feature report button in here, which honestly, this is really pretty new. I think this is like within the last 6 months, and I have not done much with this, to be quite honest with you. But this is something that Esri knew that people wanted. They knew that people were looking to be able to create reports easily from these, and that's what I was playing with to get that Word file in there. And so if you click this, it'll give you, feature level reports. There's obviously, you can do some like summary level reports, and Survey123 has some very basic tools for doing that. It's mostly kind of in this analyze tab, and you can start to see, I was showing you this before, just, feature type, how many of each type did we plug in? And so it kind of gives you this basic overview report. This is about as good as far as I know as you can do using AGOL. If you want to make nicer graphs and stuff out of your data, I would suggest from your content, exporting it as like an Excel file. And you could go in and Excel in your desktop, obviously, and make nicer graphs and tables and stuff. Yeah, sorry everyone, I just had a little sneezing fit there. So yeah, this is kind of the summary report, you know, summarizing up all the data. Again, I would kind of recommend you do this somewhere else, like maybe Excel or you know, another software you may have for dealing with like spreadsheet type data and creating reports. These feature reports are more about, right, like individual features, you know, making a little report page for each one of these record surveys, which I think is something that's probably very commonly wanted out of Survey123. You have your people go out and collect data at each given point. You can create a little summary report that you could send out to a property owner or a manager or something like that. So if you open this feature report, again, I was just experimenting around with this for maybe half an hour during the break. So this is just kind of an experimental showing you that this exists. I don't have a ton of insight here, but you can select a record or you can do all the records. We just select the one from the post office. And you have some options about how you want to export, you know, one page for each feature if you had multiple selected, or all of them in one kind of file. Oh, that's a good question, Karen. I see Karen's question. Let me get back to that in just a minute. That's another thing I've been playing around with over the break here to figure out the exact functionality so I can tell you guys correctly. So yes, Karen, I see your question. I'll get that in just a few minutes here as to how we can do that. So you have to select a template, and this is where I'm sure there's a lot here to dig into that I am unaware of at the moment. You can manage your templates. There's something where you can download sample templates. I had it, I think I just did the individual record sample template. And you can give it a name and you can save it to a folder and give it an extension. And that's where I click this generate. And it takes a few seconds. And while that's creating, I see Paul has a question. I know Survey123 points can be opened in a map and the viewer can manually create drive routes, but can AGOL automatically create an efficient drive route path from point to point? Oh, so I assume what you're thinking, Paul, is like that you would collect one of these new surveys and drop a point in, and then it might automatically, like when you drop that point, it might automatically trigger like the creation of a street route to your office, for instance. I don't think there's a way you could do that manually real easily. You may be able to do something with uploading geoprocessing services. But I still think you'd have to run those manually. You'd have to take the new updated Survey123 points and you could run a geoprocessing service to speed it up a little bit, but I don't even know honestly how much more efficient that would be than just using the tools right in the AGOL web map viewer where you can create the drive times. So I don't think so without a lot of custom coding. I'm sure it could be done if you had someone coding a custom web app, like maybe using the web app builder developer edition that lets you make more complicated web apps. But off the bat, out of the box, I don't think there's a quick and easy way to do that. Desktop, yeah, you could do this in desktop, Paul. I have done that for some clients before. There are, if you start using Python on your desktop, there are some libraries in the ArcPy module that will let you write scripts that will download and upload things from AGOL. So you could write a script that would download this point layer, run some network analysis, find the closest routes, and then re-upload, overwrite the layer, for instance. You could definitely do it on the desktop with some custom Python coding. Okay, and in the meantime, you'll see it created my form. I can download it and open up in a Word document. And here it is. Now you can see this is pretty basic. I mean, obviously I need to experiment around a little more with the report features, but it's at least something, got all the attributes here. And the maps clearly need some help. They need to be zoomed in quite a bit. These maps are not terribly useful. But yeah, you can see how you can start to play around with this. Again, I just kind of impromptu decided to show you this. So sorry, I don't have a more detailed explanation, but I'm kind of learning about this right along here with you. And so I'd like to kind of, again, I just kind of wanted to quickly touch on this, all the stuff within AGOL, because I think you guys are pretty comfortable working in AGOL. And what I really wanted to spend more time on during this afternoon session, during this hour and a half we have left, we'll see if we fill it all or not, was just to go a little more free form and show you some more advanced Survey123 topics that are newer, that you might not know about, that I think are particularly useful. And so if you see this report, there's a lot more stuff in here than the original survey that I kind of created for you this morning that we walked through. You can see we started off with kind of some of this stuff on the top here, but then there's some more complex things that I've added. So what I'm going to do is go back to here. Oh. What happens if I... Okay, and that's what takes me back to my home page, that launch button. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go back to my Survey123 Connect. And I'm going to open back up that form number 2. And I'm going to open back up the Excel. This button right here, I don't think I showed you this, but if you lose your Excel sheet, you just see your survey sheet, you can click this XLS form and it'll open back up your Excel sheet for you. And here we go. Pull this over so we can kind of flip back and forth here. And you'll see I added some new stuff in here. This survey is a little longer, a little more complicated than the last time you saw it. And so first off, I just want to go through how this actually worked. So I started off with this same one, this form number 2 that I kind of built for you and published and we worked with this morning. And I left, all those fields that we added this morning, all of these ones are exactly the same. I didn't touch those. But what I did do is I added some additional questions into my survey. I went to republish this, and I don't believe it changes the URL, although that's a really good point, Karen. I don't think it does, but let me double check that this afternoon and get back to you. I'm pretty sure that does not overwrite the URL of the survey. It just kind of overwrites it. And since I didn't change any of my initial questions, it kept those. Actually, you saw if we go back into my survey, 1, 2, 3 here, and you look at this little graph, I collected 6 of these at first using the old form. And then I changed the form and added those additional questions. And I added one more, that point at the post office I've been showing you that has some additional stuff in it. So I have that one record that was created after the survey was updated and overwritten. But these 6 records right here still stuck. You can see I still have a total of 7. So those records still stuck. If I had changed anything in the original fields, those ones we did this morning, if I had changed the feature name from being a text to being an integer type or something like that, then obviously it would have had trouble trying to transfer the existing text feature names into the new integer field. So if you change the schema for your existing fields, that's probably going to cause you some issues. But if you just add on top of what you already had, you'll be okay. Obviously, those 6 points I collected before I changed the form, those 6 points aren't going to have any of these new fields in them. And in a real scenario, that may necessitate you going back and filling out this new info for those new sites. So that's why I was saying too earlier, stressing like you really want to try to make sure your survey is 100% before you send your people out in the field, because that would not be good if you figured out one thing that you forgot, like, oh man, we really needed to collect the vegetation species and that wasn't in the survey, and now we have to go back out to every one of those sites and collect that one piece of data. That's obviously not good. So just really want to make sure that this is correct before you deploy it to your users. But that's kind of how that works. As long as you only add to your survey and you don't edit the schema of the existing fields you had, you're all right to republish and overwrite this. So the first thing I wanted to show you, this advanced topic, is this one's a really useful one. It's called cascading selects. And like I told you earlier, it's the ability to have your pick lists change based on the answers to previous questions. So right here, this is one we had before, right? This field for feature type. And you see in my survey, I added a new question for feature subtype. And here, so I'll show you the behavior first and I'll show you how I did it. I defined subtypes for government buildings, community facilities, and businesses. I thought, I guess there could be different kinds of parks, but I didn't really go into that. Same with other, there's not different types of other. But if I choose government, community facility, or business, it's going to pop me up a second question, feature subtype. And if I choose government building, it's going to give me a list of government buildings. And again, these are just simple examples that I came up with. This is not in any way, exhaustive or meant to be real. But just a few examples of different types of government buildings that you might be looking at. If I change this to a cultural or community facility, my feature subtype question, my pick list here, changes to different types of cultural and community facilities. Likewise, if I go to business, it changes to different kinds of businesses. If I select park or other, the subtype question completely goes away. You don't even see it. So how do we actually accomplish that? So the first thing to do is just to create the question. This is the subtype, the feature subtype, and it's a question where we want to select one from a list. I just gave it a name and a label. And then I went in here and I created a choices list. And you can see here, this all looks just like what we were doing this morning. I created a list called feature subtype. I added all my different kinds of feature subtype in there. Then you can see off here to the right, in the first blank column, these two were populated. They've been here since this morning, image and label. But I added a new column and I called it subtype filter. And you can call it whatever you want in here. Again, these are like field names. So I think you want to avoid like spaces and certain special characters. But I just typed this myself, where it says subtype filter. That was my name for this column. And next to every feature subtype, I gave it a grouping. And these groupings come from our pick list up here. That's going to be our magic to linking the two together, is you take the choices out of your feature type and you tell each subtype which kind of feature type it is. And these have to match. If this and this don't match, that's not going to work. And I can add multiple fields too if there was, I mean, I can't think of a good example off the top of my head, but you could type in another column here and you could have two kind of lookup fields. It's a government building and it's a something else. I can't quite think of anything, but you can add in kind of this lookup column for yourself. So we're still doing a select one from a list question out of this feature subtype field. If we highlight this row for this question and we scroll over, I'll get back to that in a second. You use this choice filter column, column N. And you'll see here I typed subtype filter, and that's the name of my column from here. Subtype filter equals, and then the $sign and the curly brackets are just parentheses, and it's equal to, and this is where the $sign and the curly brackets mean you're pulling the answer from another question. So in this case, we're pulling the answer from the feature type question. And it has to be that name. The name of the question is what goes in between the curly brackets. So pull the value from whatever you previously selected for the feature type, which is going to be one of those ones out of feature type choices, right? It's going to be one of these 5 values. And if what's in the subtype filter column is equal to that, then present that choice. And then the way that I got it to only show up, because again, remember I only defined subtypes for government buildings, cultural, and businesses. I didn't provide subtypes for a park or other. And so that's why I thought I could get a little more advanced and okay, well, if they choose park or other, let's just not show them the feature subtype question. And I did that. We saw this morning. I'll show you again. It's this relevant field, whether or not this is relevant to be shown. And you can see I just typed in feature type, again, pulling that value. The $sign and the curly brackets mean you're pulling the value from what you chose for the feature type question. And so only make this question relevant if the feature type is equal to government building or cultural community or business. And so that's kind of the two parts of that, setting the relevant field to make sure that it only shows up if they select the certain type of feature type. And then more robustly for the cascading selects, incorporating this list here where we assign different subtypes. Oh, I'm seeing that you can't hear me. Let's see if I can turn up, yeah, microphone volume. Oh, there we go. My microphone volume is super low. How is that? Is that a little louder and better for you guys? Way too loud, is that what we're saying? Let me readjust. Let's turn turn it back down a little bit. Is that a little better, everyone? Does this sound good? Okay, sounds like this is a good volume. All right, sorry about that. Where were they? Okay, Caitlin had a really good question there. So for those that are called other, right, you can't really define like different subtypes of other. But what you could do is if they choose other, you could present them with another question, right, to give them the option to type it in. So why don't we do that? I'm going to add a row just so to make sure they show up. I'm sure you've noticed this, that the questions in your survey show up in the order of the rows. So I want to have this one be underneath the feature subtype. And this one would just be a text box, right? We just allow them to type in a piece of text. And let's call it feature. And this is where when you get into really long surveys, some of your names get really long. Some of these question names, just because you have questions that are dependent on questions and third questions. And so some of these can get kind of long. So let's call this feature subtype other description. And for the label, we'll say I don't know, other feature. And now we only want this to show up if for feature type, they choose other. So we're going to go to our relevant column, which is the L column. And we're going to go here into our relevant, and we're going to do $, curly brackets. Oh, and we are looking for the field. We're looking for feature type again. Feature type equals other. And again, I want to make sure that other matches. I'm pretty sure if we go to my choices, yeah, I had capitalized other. So now if I save this, we'll let that update. And now here, if I choose a feature type of a government building, it gives me this feature subtype question. If I choose other, it gives me this other feature type question where I can now type in, what that other kind of feature is. So that is kind of how I would accomplish that. Yeah, these cascading selects are really powerful. There's some really nice examples. I'll send you guys out a bunch of different resources, some links to Esri pages where you can download examples and things like that. There's a good, if you go, I'll send out, there's a good Esri example where they show you, it's an example using just cities and states in Australia, for those of you that are familiar with the cities and states of Australia. But it gives you this example where you can have like a list of all the states and then cities and which state every city is in, and it works similarly. So yeah, those cascading selects are definitely really, really powerful. Another thing I want to show you that can be useful is something called repeats. If there's a possibility that you need to actually do a question more than once. And so I'm going to make up a scenario here. I'm going to need a couple new rows in my table. I'm going to put those in. Insert those rows in the right order. So let's say, for instance, I'm just kind of pulling this off the top of my head, you were doing like maybe a damage inspection report, and for each one of these buildings, you were looking around to see if there was any damage. And right, it's quite possible that there are multiple damage places, multiple areas of damage on any particular building. And so what you might want to do is you might want to create a question that's damage. Well, we have to do the type first. So that would probably be, you might do a pick list of different types of damage, broken windows, I don't know, siding ripped off, different kinds of damage that could happen to a building. For the sake of simplicity example, I'm just going to set this as a text field, and we'll say we're just going to let our users type a little note about what kind of damage it looks like. Damage description. And then maybe actually, in addition to describing the damage, maybe we want to let them take a picture. We'll do an image, and we'll call it damage pic. So for each place that there would be damage on the building, we want to let your field workers, write a little text description and maybe take a picture of the damage. And we want to let them do this multiple times. So right now, if we just click save, you'll see our form will update. And right here, we have our two new fields we just added: damage description, damage picture. And this all works fine, but right now this is assuming that there's only one, right? I can only type in one damage description. I can only take one picture of damage. So we want to let them be able to do this multiple times. So what we're going to do is we are going to plug in what's called a repeat. And if you look here, it's actually one of your question types. And this is where we can get into, not all of the question types are actually questions. I know I told you earlier, each row in the Excel table ends up being one question in your survey, and that's actually not true. Some of these question types are not questions. Particularly here, I want to kind of show you these few, repeats and then also groups. So these are kind of like bookends or parentheses or something, where you have to, for a group or a repeat, you have to have a row where it begins and you have to have a row where it ends. Otherwise, it'll throw you an error. And that's why I left a blank row above and below these two questions I just added. So in the row above these two, I'm going to do a begin repeat, and you have to give it a name. So I'll just call it damage repeat. And I'll copy that over to the label too. And down here, I have to, underneath these two, I have to end the repeat. And again, I will just copy the names over from the begin, so we have the same names here and there. And now if I save this, we'll update our form. And now if we go to our damage, we can type in a description and we can take a picture. There's my grayed out webcam. And there's our damage number 1. And you see 1 of 1. But now wrapping it in that repeat did is it gave us this little bar down here where there's a plus button. And now I can add a second image, and I can keep doing this. I can keep adding, you know, there might be a way that you can limit the number of repeats you can have, you know, don't let them submit 100 different ones. But I can just keep adding these damage descriptions, various damage descriptions, and taking pictures of different damages, and it tells us. Now this does make your data slightly more complicated. What this is going to do now is obviously we've complicated our data structure here by being able to try to plug in more than one data point for each field in our table. You can see how that might cause some data conflicts there. So this will make your data a little more complicated. What this will now do is it'll upload a related table of all of these damages. So actually, in your damage column in your main data set in your hosted feature service for the survey, it'll just store like a link to the ID in an external table. And that external related table will have, you know, for each survey ID, all of the damage descriptions and the pictures attached inside of that. So yeah, that's a pretty useful one. Again, being able to do these repeats. Similar, I want to show you to the repeats are something called groups. And that's where, again, I'm being a little free form here. This is not, you know, necessarily exactly how you would want to create a survey in a real scenario, but we can make groups of things. And again, you have to start and end your groups. So up here at the top, I'll click down and go to a begin group, and I'll give it a name, group 1. You see how it's coming in bold up here? As far as I can tell, anything you do with like formatting in your Excel doesn't affect this. Like over here, I set these to be word wrap, so they're neater, little stuff like that. And as far as I can tell, the formatting you do doesn't affect what happens in the form over here. It drops the formatting when it reads over into this box. So just a note. So I'll do begin group, and let's go down a few questions. How about up to government type? And we'll insert one right here. And at the end of this group of questions that we want to be grouped, we have to end the group. And again, I'll make sure it says group 1. Now if we save this, you'll see this comes over, and now you see how this group, and it says group 1, and it's all in a box where these are grouped together. And we can create multiples now. If we go here, we can create begin group. We'll call it group 2. And we'll go down here and we'll, after our damage repeat. And you can nest the repeats within the groups. You can nest groups within groups. That all works just fine. You just have to remember to kind of basically, you know, think about like bookends or parentheses or whatever. You have to begin group, begin repeat. You need to end the repeat and then end the group. You can't have like your parentheses out of order there, if that makes sense. And so we'll go down and we'll end the group. Group 2. If I save that again, it'll And you'll see I have these two groups. And there's a way, let me see this, I need to go into my cheater example that I already have filled out on my other screen. There's a way that you can make these be closed by default. Aha, there we go. That's what I was looking for. So there's a way you can make these be closed by default, and I find that pretty useful. It starts off looking like this. And that is using the appearances field, which is another thing on my list I wanted to tell you about. So if we go back into our Excel sheet here, and we go to this column, I, appearance. I showed you this a little bit. Remember I showed you with the select one with the minimal. That's what gets it to be a drop down instead of just listing them out underneath a question like this. And if we go into our types, remember this last tab here, the types is just kind of a lookup. And it shows us right here all these different things that you can put into that appearance box and which type of fields they apply to and kind of what they do. So that's a good reference here for what's going on in the appearances. So for a group though, if I set the appearance, if I use the word compact, which why this list is not alphabetical, I do not know. If I change my groups to be compact, and I think you only have to do it with the beginning, the end kind of tags aren't as important. But if I do and do the same thing up here with my begin for group 1, I set the appearance to be compact. And if we refresh this, you'll see now that those start up closed and the user can open them. Another neat thing that you can do to make your forms look nice is in that appearance field, you can set a width. And you do it, so in this appearance field, you can actually type multiple things in here. It's not just, okay, well, it's going to be compact, and so I can't use any of these other things. You know, I can only use one at a time. That's not it. You can type in multiple things in here, and you just have to separate them by a space. And there's one that's not in this list that's really useful. I'm going to just type a space to separate a new kind of appearance tag here. I'm just going to type W2. And what that stands for is width 2. And what that's going to tell it, that should work. Yeah. That's going to tell it width 2, and it's going to tell it to make it 2 questions wide. There's not really a way you can set, exact like pixel widths or inch widths or something. It's just going to tell it to be 2 questions wide. And we just did that for group 1. So now you'll see if we open up group 1, it presents it as 2 questions wide. We had 3 questions in group 1, so this 4th space is kind of empty, but you can see that it presents them. If we were to change it to width 3, you would see our group 1 tab. Now we have all 3 of those questions stuck across one row horizontally. And you can get real complicated with this. You can have groups nested inside of groups. I'll show you real quickly here. Is this the right one? Yes. This is an advanced example I have. And you can see here I have groups, And inside of the groups, I have groups. And then inside of each group, I have them set up to be different widths. This one's a width 2. You can see like under activities, I have all these different types of activities. Under the checklist, there's different things inside my checklist, but you can kind of group within groups. Yeah, so you can set up things that kind of look, you can see how just there's some advanced stuff going on with the setup of this survey here. Go back to my form number 2 though. Some other things we can do with the appearances, again, with the select ones, you can do some neat things. You can type in, this can be useful actually, you can type in for some of these select ones like minimal, and then like you also do autocomplete. And this isn't that useful here, but if you have really long lists, like that one I showed you a second ago, where you have states and cities, you know, you can imagine if you had that was a pretty short list. I'm sure that wasn't every city in Australia, but if you had a list of like, I've done this before with like every county in Colorado. If you have people that are working in Colorado and they want to be able to say what county it is, you create a list of every county in Colorado. And right, I think we've got 64 counties in Colorado, so you can see how a 64 long drop-down list could be a little tedious and cumbersome. Which one did I applied that to the feature type. So again, it doesn't really apply that well here because we only have a few feature types, but if I start typing, I have to go to the right one, feature type, not feature name. And see, if I start typing G, it brings me up government building. If I start typing O, other. So you see, I'll kind of start to sort through that for me if I type CUL. Like I said, not terribly useful here because we only have a handful of feature types. But if you have a real long pick list, like all the counties or all the cities or something like that, this autocomplete can be kind of nice. And so you see how you can do that multiple. You can do just minimal, which tells it to collapse it into a drop-down, and then just type a space and also do autocomplete. A few more things, just going through my list here of all the stuff I wanted to show you. Let's go into, there's like 4 things here that kind of all go together that I want to show you. And it all comes down to how can you incorporate multiple points or multiple pieces of geometry into your survey. How can you get people to be able to collect more than one point with their survey? And so that, I'm going to just put some blank rows in here just to separate. That is what's going on down here. So there's a number of advanced things going on in these half dozen rows here that I want to go through now. The first thing I did is I changed up my choices list a little bit. If you remember, by default, you have a yes, no, and I just also added NA to that list. And so these fields, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't refigure all this out over the break. I just copied and pasted out of another survey, that one we were just looking at, actually, that advanced survey with the unique groupings and the layout there. I just kind of copied and pasted. So this doesn't really apply to feature, like buildings and features, but just go with me here, if you will. So with this one, it came out that other form, which is like an inspection form. You may have picked up, it was like an oil and gas kind of well inspection form. And one of the things that they wanted to inspect is were there any dead vegetation or wet spots on the slopes? And you can see that in this horrendously long question name that has no spaces in it, and would have taken you a while to even read where the words are, probably, if I hadn't told you. So looking for dead vegetation or wet spots on the slopes. And that's just a simple, that goes to that yes, no, or not applicable. And so that's right here. You can see this question. If you click no or not applicable, nothing happens. If I click yes, I get some additional questions. And so first off, you see I have these questions here. I have a geo point, which is my second point. I have two questions that are hidden that we'll get to in a second. And I have an image. And all of these, if we scroll over to our relevant column, all of these have the same relevant statement set. Okay, so these little pop-ups are nice, but then sometimes they're annoying when they cover up what you're looking at. You can see all four of these have the same relevant, which is that dead vegetation or wet spots on slopes is equal to yes. So that's what controls this behavior. No, NA, those four questions go away. As soon as you click yes, you see those four questions. So the next thing is you want to okay, I'm seeing in the chat box that the mic popping is getting pretty bad. Let me see what I can do here. Let's try that. Is that any better? Does that sound a little less poppy and distorted to everyone? Okay, cool. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat pod. Just yell at me if I'm not sounding good. I don't want you guys to just struggle through me gargling. So yeah, you can see that we've been through that. That relevant column is how we can control this. Underneath here, you'll see we have a second geopoint question where I can open up a map and set a second point somewhere. And so we have a geopoint, and you can see you put it in as a question type of geopoint. But as you probably all know, if you don't, I'll tell you, you are not allowed to have two geometries, right? That if you just think intrinsically about GIS data and the way GIS data works, we can't have 2 points for one row in our attribute table, right? Each row in the attribute table is 1 point or one polygon or one line, but there's one geometry for each points. And sometimes you want to fudge that in your survey. Like I said, there may be scenarios. I think there's a lot of scenarios. I'm sure you can all think of some where you would want to be able to collect multiple points. And so what you can do is you set it as a geopoint again. If you have two geometries, so geopoint, and you can see down here at the bottom, I also have a geoshape. I'll get to that in a minute. If you do that, by default, it's going to throw you an error that you can't have multiple geometries. So if we look in our row for our geopoint field, we scroll over, it's pretty far over. Right here, this column, the U column, bind Esri field type. And what this does is it overwrites whatever is in your A column. Whatever you have for your type here, this will actually overwrite it. And force Survey123 to treat it differently than what it actually is. That's kind of the best explanation I can give. So it's pulling a geo point, but we know that Survey123 is not going to like that. So what you can just do is you can type null. And there's a good article I'll send you about this that kind of explains this in more depth. You can just type null, and that suffices to make Survey123 happy. As to why in the back end of the programming that works, I am sure I don't know. But if you just type null, that kind of tricks it into not knowing that you have a second geopoint question, which is breaking the rules. And you'll see down here for this geo shape I did the same thing. So that's how you can get this second geopoint in here, where we're able to, within wherever we were, where, near the site that we were locating, specifically on that site, where is the dead vegetation on the slope? And right here. You can take a picture. That's nothing too special. You're allowed to have multiple pictures in your survey. So that's no big deal. You can have as many pictures as you want. Nothing real special that I did there. I just added an image field and gave it a name. And then here it gets tricky to work with multiple geometries. Obviously for what I was kind of describing before, right? You can't have two locations for every row in your attribute table. That's not how GIS data works. So I find that the easiest way to deal with this is actually, instead of trying to store two geometries and work that second geometry, the best way is you pull the coordinates. And that's what these two fields are. And they both say hidden, and hidden means that the user doesn't see them. They're in the back end of the survey. They're data that needs to get put in the database. But you don't actually want the user to see it. And these can be really useful, again, if you don't want your users to be able to change things, for instance. If there's certain pieces of data that you just don't want people to be able to mess with at all. And this is a nice way to kind of, keep people true, I guess, if that's something you're worried about. I know that's not a great concern to have, but you can hide these questions and you can have them do some calculations based on other fields, and that's what we're doing here. So first off, we tell it that it's a hidden field type, but that's not like a real question type, right? That doesn't equate to like a number or a text or an image. That doesn't really actually tell it what kind of field you want. That just tells it that you want it to be hidden. And that's where this U column, the bind Esri field type, comes into play again. And in here, you can tell it, you have to type Esri field type like this. And then you can type in like a field type, double, integer, string. You can kind of replace double with the different types of fields. So again, this here, and I don't know exactly why they have it, why it works this way, but in the type of question, you have to tell it that it's hidden. And then over here in the bind field type that overrides the default type that you've plugged in, you have to tell it that in this case, I'm pulling the X and the Y coordinates. And so I want that to be a field type of double. Now, if these are hidden questions though, right, your users aren't ever gonna see them. They can't plug in an X and a Y because they don't even ever see this question. So unless you do something else, the way this is set up right now, you're just going to end up with two fields in your table called dead vegetation or wet spots X, dead vegetation or wet spots Y. And they're all just going to be null and empty and no data, not useful in any way. So what we can do, and this can get quite complex, you can actually calculate fields based on other fields. So for instance, I've seen this used like where there's some kind of a score maybe, and you have different fields and it's what condition is this thing in 1 through 5? What condition is this other thing in 1 through 5? You know, what condition is item number 3 in 1 through 5? And then maybe you want to take an average score. And you can use this calculation field to say, you know, field 1 plus field 2 plus field 3 divided by 3 or whatever. You can type in some calculations here that are related to the previous questions. So you always want to have this. If you have a hidden field, you're going to need to automatically populate it somehow, because your users are never going to see it. Your end users are never going to have the opportunity to ever type in data for these two questions. So that means that they need to be somehow filling themselves in automatically. And the function I'm using here, again, I'll send you some info on this, is the pull data is what you can do. And the syntax here, again, I don't know exactly why it is what it is, but if you read through the documentation, this is the syntax you have to use. At GeoPoint tells it that you're looking at a GeoPoint type of field. You can also do some things where you like upload external tables. That's getting pretty advanced, but you can. I think the article I can send you on this shows you some talks about how you can like upload an external lookup table into your survey and start to do things like that to pull data out of another table. But this one is kind of using a neat little trick where you can pull from a GeoPoint, and then you have to tell it which GeoPoint. Again, that's consistent between the formatting here, is that the $ and the curly brackets always reference another question. So from the GeoPoint feet, you know, type, and specifically the GeoPoint dead vegetation or wet spots GeoPoint, which is this question right here. That text in the box matches that text right there. And then you just lastly, you tell it to pull the X, or in the one below, you tell it to pull the Y. And this is going to pull it in the coordinate system being used, which for AGOL by default is going to be WGS84, that web Mercator. But it'll pull your X and your Y. So then what you'll end up with is as you can see, if we go into some of my data here and just review. I remember I told you I collected a bunch of these points, and then I changed the survey and added all this extra stuff and added the one more point. So if I click on that one point again on the post office here, and I go down, and you can see right here, I don't know why these maps aren't drawing, but you can see right here, location of dead vegetation or wet spots on the slopes. And as a part of that, it does kind of internally capture that, and there should be a map here. But then you can see those two hidden fields, and those auto-populated. So if you look in your data table, you'll see that you have a field where you have your X and Y coordinates stored. And that's where you can pretty quickly do something like maybe, you know, plot up these secondary X and Y coordinates in ArcMap and make a second point data set of where specifically the dead vegetation is located. There's a number of different things that you can do to pull that together, you know, to start to work with that data in there once you have those X and Y points. Just looking through my list here, we are running a bit ahead of schedule, I know. I'm thinking of other things I could show you, but I really think this is a good starting point for some advanced topics in Survey123. So I think what I'd like to do actually, instead of just continuing to talk at you, is why don't we open this up a little bit? Does anyone have any questions, anything they'd like that I haven't talked about that maybe they'd like to see? Okay, yeah, Caitlin says she'd like to see the relevant and calculation fields again, sure. So if we go back to our form here, so the relevant is one of the first columns here. It's column L. And this is, you can basically think of it as like a definition query almost, right? Whatever this relevant column, you have to have some kind of a query statement in it. And if the query statement turns out to be true, the question gets shown. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. So like right here, we have this government type question that is dependent on our owner type. And so right here in our government type question, in the relevant field, you can see we have the $sign and the curly brackets. And again, that's always referencing a previous question. So whatever data value, the person typed in for that previous question, in this case, owner type. And for owner type, we know that we have these choices. Sorry, it's just public or private, right? We've set that up. It's a pick one. So the only two things that can ever be in our owner type field are public or private. So here in our government type field, we're referencing that. We're going to make this government type question dependent on the owner type. So pull in that owner type with the curly brackets and the $sign, and then it equals public, because those were our two choices from our owner types, is either public or private. For instance, if I set this to be anything else, if I just typed even just an X at the end of there, this question would never show. There's no way you could get this government owner type question to show, because your owner type can never be public X. We have our owner type set up to be a select from a pick list that only has two distinct choices in it, and one of them is not this. So if you were to publish this, you wouldn't get any errors. Let's see, actually, I wonder if you would get, if it's smart enough that it would throw you the errors. I don't think so. Yeah, no. So right, if I choose public, that doesn't show up. If I choose private, there's no way for me to get this government owner type question to show up, because I made a mistake here, and that's not a possibility. The owner type can never equal public with an X. The field calculations right here next to it, and I wish I had some numeric fields here, because that's really where it can be powerful. But we could even a geopoint, like here for our damage description text. Even what if I think we can set that. I'm going off script here, going off track. So I think if we set the calculation for this damage description, which again is just a text field, curly brackets, if we set that to be, what's another text field, we could calculate that off of feature name. This is where I'm not sure of the syntax here, but let's see if this works. I had feature name and then just a word at the end, plus damage. And this may not work, so I'm not sure what the proper syntax is here, but let's see. If we open that up and go to, what question did we just set that for? Our damage description question. So let's go, which is under our group 2. So if we type a feature name, I don't know, nice park. I don't know. There we go. See, and you see how that, so whatever I type in up here, that simple statement just added the word damage to the end of it. But you can see if I type, you know, XXX and then I go again, maybe I have to click out of it to get that to stick. Yep. And so whatever I type in this box up here gets put into this box down here and gets the word damage thrown at the end of it. And you could do this with, again, like numeric fields, for instance. You could have it, you know, add, multiply, divide a number of numeric fields that you have to calculate a score or an index or something like that. That could be pretty useful. I've seen some cool Survey123s that fire districts have put together where they're doing, you know, structural fire, wildfire risk assessments, and they rank different things 1 through 5. You know, what's the roof made out of? 1 bad, 5 good. How close is the vegetation to the house? 1 bad, 5 good. You know, there's a number of things they go through and they rate it on a 1 to 5 scale. And then at the end, you can, you know, create a total or an average or whatever calculations they do to create a total composite score out of the many individual scores, for instance. That's a good example of how to do that. But even yeah, so you can kind of see how that works there. So you can see how you can really start to fill out your form a whole lot. It's, you know, based on how you answer it, if depending on your specific workflow, but, you know, by the time you get to the bottom of the form, you could have a whole bunch of your stuff mostly filled out based on the answers to what you gave it above. I think there's ways that you can even implement like some if-then logic inside this calculation field. So maybe if the owner type is private, you know, you're doing inspections for the government and you don't care about private buildings. So maybe you say that if owner type equals private, then your damage description automatically goes to not applicable. Something like that. But yeah, really this relevant field is very, very advantageous. And I think the pull data here for the GeoPoints is very advantageous. One last thing down here that I did want to show you is I did want to touch on the GeoShapes or the GeoTrace. And the GeoShape is a polygon, GeoTrace is a line. And you can see here, I've added that into my survey. I've added one more. So if there was an area where there was dead vegetation or wet spots on the slope, you could go into a map and kind of trace that out. You know, where are those dead vegetation and wet spots? And that's right here. We can click. And let's see. Okay, it does kind of work the same on your phone or on here as your phone. So you can click this little shape down here. And you can hold your mouse, and I'm just holding my mouse button down, and you can see I can just trace out whatever that area is, for instance. And it even shows me down the bottom the area and the perimeter. If I do this, it kind of tries to, I believe, like round things off into shapes. If I try to draw a rectangle, see it, and that totally reoriented my rectangle. But that's what this little shape one does, is it tries to, if you draw something that's supposed to be a nice shape, like a triangle here, it'll try to make that into a nice triangle for you. And you can kind of undo these. There's also a way, where'd it go? there's a way on my phone. I apologize. I'm not hip enough, I guess, to know how to screencast my phone onto my computer screen. I thought for a second about turning on my webcam and just like holding my cell phone up to my webcam, but then I thought I wouldn't torture you guys with that. There was a way on my phone down here. There was another button where you could, instead of doing this thing where you're kind of tracing, where you could place vertices, you could just like click to place vertices. Okay, we had some good questions coming in here. Keep them coming, Karen. Yeah, I will send out a bunch of info after the class, about kind of everything I'm doing here, all the articles that explain, how to do this well, how I figured out how to do this. Could you have one survey be relevant connected to another survey? That's a good question. I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, again, what you could do is you could write like some geoprocessing models that might download the data set and establish relationship classes on your desktop, for instance, and you can even re-upload those to AGOL. AGOL will take relationship classes. But I think that would have to be some kind of a manual desktop where you're establishing those relationships on the desktop and then re-uploading that data set to AGOL. And that's kind of a theme among AGOL in general that I've seen over the past, half a dozen years working with it, is that AGOL does not have the same kind of functionality as the desktop GIS, right? There's a lot of stuff that you just can't do in AGOL, but that if you do it in the desktop, you can push it up to AGOL and AGOL will take it. It'll see it and honor it and know what to do with it, like a relationship class, but you can't really do it efficiently in AGOL. No, you cannot create a survey on your mobile as far as I'm aware. I guess you could go into the web browser on your phone and open up that web survey designer I showed you briefly this morning. I guess technically you could do that. I would not recommend it. You saw that page, it's not a real simple page. There's a lot of buttons and dragging and dropping and there's sidebars, and I think trying to do that on the real estate of your phone would be terrible. But I guess in theory, you could try to use the web survey builder from the web browser on your phone. But again, I would not try. So generally, no, I would say you can't create surveys on your phone. You need to do that on your desktop, and then they're just consumed on the phone. And you don't need to type pull data no, you do need to type that right there. Okay, yeah, everything. And that's one thing that's a little tedious about getting to learn Survey123 is there are some very specific syntax here that I don't even fully understand, but luckily there's pretty good documentation. A lot of the stuff I'm going to send you out shows you this exact documentation, and you just kind of have to follow it. Honestly, I copy and paste a lot. I have that one advanced survey I showed you with all that fancy grouping and stuff, and that's got a lot of this stuff in it. And oftentimes when I'm working on Survey123, I'll just, not even from Survey123, I'll just go to Excel and I'll pull open that Excel file so that at least I have, the field names are different. I have to go in and change these field names because they're not the same from the other survey. But I at least get this part, the pull data at GeoPoint with the quotes and the X with the quotes, and you get all the kind of syntax so that you don't have to try to remember that. I just copy and paste, and then I know, okay, well, I need to replace, you know, the question name with whatever I'm using in my current survey. But you do have to type all of this. I don't think, yeah, the calculation doesn't have a drop down. Some of these have drop downs where you don't have to type things, but a lot of them don't. So you would have to type in pull data, parentheses, at geopoint, parentheses, you know, comma. You'd have to type that all out at least once, and then you can copy and paste it. Ooh. Caitlin's doing real GIS where you break it. That's how you know you're doing it right, is when you start breaking it. Dependency cycles amongst the XPath expression in relevant calculate. That sounds like somewhere between your relevant and calculate fields, you have like a circular logic, some kind of a circular dependency. Maybe we could get Caitlin to share her screen if she's willing to do that, and look at it. But without looking at exactly what you got in your spreadsheet, Caitlin, it's hard for me to say exactly, but it's something between the relevant and the, yeah, if let me know if you'd be, you know, if you'd want to share your screen, we can work through this. Certainly, we got some time left here. Good question, Leslie. Great question. That's fabulous. Thank you for asking that. That's really, really good, Leslie. When would you use collector versus Survey123? Because up until now, the answer, right, was, well, if you want to do points, you use Survey123, but if you want to use lines or polygons, you have to use collector. And that's no longer true. I just showed you you can do lines and polygons using Survey123. But as you saw, the way that you can collect lines and polygons in Survey123, it's not bad, but it's not nearly as robust as what is in collector. So my answer is that if your attributes matter more, if you have complex attributes, and you really want to do, like, it's more like an inspection of something where your attributes are more important, that's where Survey123 comes into play. Because Survey123, obviously you see it has this really nice interface where we can fill out attributes without feeling like we're filling out attributes. You know, average people can go in here and fill out an attribute table without typing values into a table manually. So Survey123 is really good if your attributes are more important than your geometry. Collector, on the other hand, is really meant to do geometry. It allows you to, as far as I know, Survey123 doesn't let you do this. If you try to do a location, you can either, oh, you have to go back to the polygon at the bottom. You can either zoom in, you can do the thing I've been showing you, where you do this, or, and I'm trying to find the button here. It's different on your phone. There's a button where you can click and it'll change it from like the continuous sketch to where you can just click vertices. And that's a little more accurate way to do it, but you're still just clicking vertices kind of manually in a map. And collector can allow you to actually trace where you're going, like trace a track. So you can basically turn on GPS tracking and you could, you know, walk a trail or walk the perimeter of a site boundary, something like that. And it'll collect that based on the accuracy of the GPS you're using. So usually when most people use collector, they're using it in tandem with some kind of a high accuracy GNSS receiver that's also hooked to their mobile device. And then they can walk that trail or the road, or they can walk around that site polygon. and get high accuracy GPS points of exactly where that is. So collector is definitely better at getting geometries. Where collector struggles is with attributes. If you've used collector, you know the attribute editor in collector is basically just a table. You can click in a box in the attribute table and you can manually type stuff in, you know, the same way that you would do on the desktop basically, which is not great for a lot of applications. There is a link, and I'm going to mention this, and I'm only going to mention it. There is a new product, I guess I'll say, a new piece of technology that Esri is working on. They have released it. They haven't done a big release because they probably shouldn't have released it because it's still pretty beta from what I've heard. There is a link between Survey123 and Collector. Because that's the best of both worlds. That's like woo freaking who, that's awesome. If you can use Collector to collect your geometry really accurately, and then you can switch over and use the form part of Survey123 to fill out your attributes. So there is a link between those that Esri has developed. I have not tried it, honestly, because I know a number of people I work with that have tried it, and I've heard reports from them that it is just not good right now. Unfortunately, it's just not ready for game time. It's extremely buggy. Your data ends up getting erased. Just the people I've talked to who tried to use it experienced a lot of problems. This was probably, this was maybe 6 months ago, even 6 months to a year ago. So maybe they've updated some new releases and fixed it a little bit. Maybe look into that if you're interested, but I would wait until you start hearing more about it. Generally in the gossip among the community. Right now, the community isn't gossiping about it because very few people are using it, because Esri's done a pretty soft release because it really is just, it's not quite ready for prime time yet. So hopefully one day in the future, we will be able to have the best of both worlds, do your high accuracy GPS collection and collector, and do your form attribute table editing in Survey123. But for now, you got to kind of pick and choose, unfortunately. I have seen people doing workflows where they use both, where they'll walk the line of a trail, for instance, using collector to get a nice, good accuracy, accurate location on that trail. But then they'll completely separately in Survey123, they'll drop a survey point, you know, somewhere on the trail, and they'll collect some form attributes. And then in like your desktop GIS, you could do some spatial joins to, you know, buffer out those trail points a few feet to make sure that those points you took intersect with the trail lines. And you could do some attribute pushing and shoving using like spatial joins there. Obviously, again, that's, you know, a little bit more of a complicated workflow. So hopefully that says something about when you would want to use either. It's, yeah, Survey123 is really for the table, and collectors for your geometry though. Sam asks, is it easier to bring Survey123 results into dashboard for display and summary than it is for collector? It's basically the same, Sam. I'm almost curious, actually, give me a call, shoot me an email later. I know you got my info. I'm curious what challenges you've run into bringing collector results into a dashboard. But it should be similar, because collector and Survey123, the product that comes out of them, I guess, is the same thing. It's a hosted feature service on ArcGIS Online, right? Both collector and Survey123, you end up with a hosted feature service on ArcGIS Online. So those get brought into a dashboard or a web app or a story map. You can bring results from either of those. You can bring your collector stuff into any of that. You can bring your Survey123 stuff into any of that, dashboard, story maps. And it'll work pretty much the same, because it's the same workflow. The only difference would be perhaps you're dealing with like points instead of polygons. I think Survey123 might make it easier to pull things into a dashboard from the sense of data cleanliness, right? It can be really hard to create like summary reports if you're, if someone's typing in your feature type and someone types in, you know, government completely spells out the whole word, or someone instead of typing a slash just does a space or types a dash or something, you know, that kind of data cleanliness. And then when you're trying to use summary tables, you get the number of GOV' building, but then you also get the number of government buildings. And so from that standpoint, just from a data cleanliness standpoint, I think it can help you do some summary statistics type stuff, some summarization, just because you don't have to worry about going in and cleaning up and scrubbing your data before you can accurately summarize it. Now, I think that's one of the biggest appeals of Survey123 overall. I think you guys have probably seen that and got that by now, but that's one of the biggest appeals, period, of this, why so many people like it over a standard paper form is, one, you eliminate manual data entry from the paper form into a database. And two, you can, you know, force people to pick from a pick list, which means that it's always exactly the same. And you have that really nice data quality, data cleanliness. So yeah, I think it saves a lot of data cleanliness. Like I said, it also saves that manual transfer of data, manual entry of data from a paper into a database, which of course is another opportunity for error. It's very possible for, you know, someone who's typing something in to fat finger something, and you end up with a mistake that way too. So the Survey123 workflow eliminates all of that, which is probably, if I would have to say what's the number one reason to use it, I would say that you save time on manual data entry and data cleanup. Anything else in the last like 10 minutes here? I'd be happy to answer Caitlin's question. All right, why don't we spend the last couple minutes here, and I'm happy to stay on past 3 o'clock too. I know you guys probably have other things going on, but if you guys have more questions and stuff, I'm happy to keep working through this past 3 o'clock. If you guys want to hang out, no skin off my back whatsoever. But yeah, maybe Nick, could we get Caitlin like presenter status or whatever to get her to be able to share her screen, and we can maybe see if we can figure out why she's getting an error. I very much think that troubleshooting together is a great way for everyone to learn. Excellent. Caitlin, you are now a panelist, which means you can share. So I'm going to stop sharing mine. And there we go. There's Caitlin's screen. Okay, so first off, just why don't you save this, Caitlin, so I can see that error message that comes up again. Dependency cycles amongst the XPath. Okay, so you had copied and pasted the whole thing into the chat there. Let's look at relevant and calculate. I think it probably is coming from, yeah, exactly where you have your cursor there, Caitlin, because those two rows have both relevant and calculate. Veg, wet spot, or dead equals yes. And that looks right. All those relevant statements you have, you're looking for that question you created called veg, wet spot, or dead equals yes. So that looks right. Pull data. Let's see. At geopoint, comma, $, curly brackets. point, yep. X. That looks exactly correct to me. There's nowhere else you're using calculations, right? Try this. Try maybe like copy and paste those two calculation cells into a different tab, like maybe like that types tab or something that's not looking at. Just get rid of those so that if we can like delete them and see if that causes the error to go away. At least then we'll be able to tell if those are the source of the error, but they look exactly right to me. Now try, yeah, save and revalidate and see if that, okay. Okay, so that wasn't it. Dependencies amongst the relevant. Oh, that could be it. Yep, and that you do have to pay attention to that. Definitely your capitals, because it has to be, stuff has to be exactly the same. Path expressions in relevant calculate. It's got to be something in that relevant field. Where is there? Feature type. This is really tricky, Caitlin. Why don't you send me this spreadsheet and I'll figure it out. But initially, yeah, I don't see exactly what this would be. That all looks exactly right to me. Okay, to the point of the veg wet spot. Yeah, okay. GeoPoint. Did you, for your second GeoPoint, did you make sure to type in that null in that Esri bind field column? Yes, you did. Okay. And you typed in double. Okay. Your feature subtype question is dependent on your feature type. Your feature other is dependent on your feature subtype. Your government owner type is dependent on your owner type. I was looking, just maybe you had like the wrong, a field that was relevant to itself inside that L column, but that doesn't. Subtype filter equals, yeah, equals feature type, and that's typed correctly. Is that that column in your choices tab called subtype filter exactly like that? Yes, it is. Yep. Feature subtype and subtype filter. Yep. Yeah, that is super weird, Caitlin. Yeah, I don't immediately see what on earth this would be. Veg, wet spot, or dead. Yep. Oh. Yes. There we go. That's what I was looking for, Caitlin. Yep, I just didn't see it and you did. We have this veg, wet spot, or dead question is dependent on itself. So if you delete that cell that your cursor's over exactly, just delete that. That should fix it. Beautiful. There we go. Excellent. Yeah, so you can see these can get pretty, pretty gnarly. If you start to get really, oh, Caitlin, you are always very, very welcome. Yeah, I mean, if you start to get some of these complex questions, like I think that advanced survey I showed you, I think that spreadsheet is probably like a couple hundred rows long. So these can get pretty gnarly to where there is a lot of different question names and different relevant statement set where different questions are relevant to one another. And there's a lot of little spots where things like exactly what we just saw can go awry. And you have to do some digging to try to figure out where exactly something's going wrong. So this can get, complicated, definitely. Anyone else have anything else they'd like to? Yeah, go ahead and stop sharing, Caitlin. That's fine. We don't need to see everything you're doing. Does anyone else have any other questions, comments, jokes, personal insults aimed at me? Nothing? All right, then. Well, I will go ahead and put a close to this. Here, I will, again, please all, I encourage you work through those exercises I showed you, work through some of these advanced topics. I am going to compile a bunch of resources and email you guys all out, just a bunch of resources where I kind of figured out how to do all these things I've showed you. My email, I'll type it in here to answer to Sam's question, who I know he has my email address, or I'm just going to type my email address, which is just Nick, N-I-C-K, at allpointsgis.com. I think maybe you can see that. Yeah, if you go to answered questions, way down at the bottom, Deb Wilson's question, she just said thanks, but at the very bottom there, I typed my email address again, just N-I-C-K at allpointsgis.com. Please, I'd love to hear from any of you. Shoot me questions. Let me know what problems or what successes you're having. I'd love to hear from you anytime about anything, good, positive, whatever, but please feel free to reach out to me. Consider me a resource for Survey123, other things. I'm always happy to help bounce ideas around, try to problem solve collaboratively. And so, yeah, thank you all again for being here. I would love to hear from you and have a good rest of your afternoon.
Okay, that concludes our afternoon training session. Thank you all for showing up. Be sure to show up to our next event tomorrow, and we have another week of this going on, and 2 more weeks actually. So yep, we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Tell your friends. All right, thanks a lot, Nick.
Thanks. Let me end the recording.